Welcome to CSLDallas and our Science of Mind class. And we're having just a little technical difficulties this morning, but we're up and running. If for some reason you can't hear or see, just put it in the chat and let us know. All right, so we are on page 122 in the middle. We've been talking about how all of the theory of the nature of reality, how it is recreated, re-expressed as individuation, as individuals who become conscious of the fact that we are individuations of the one. And so we were talking about this whole idea that the one aspect of the divine spirit is reenacted within us, and the last sentence we worked with last week is, it is his unity with the whole, or God, on the conscious side of life, and is an absolute guarantee that he is a center of God consciousness in this vast whole, right? So on the conscious side of life, that part of us that has choice and volition, is awake, that part of us that is constantly focused on when we think about enlightenment or awakening, all of those kinds of things. That is the place where we experience and express God consciousness in terms of that impulse of life to create. Now, we will also say that we will say then that in spirit man is one with God, but what of the great law of the universe? If we are really one with the whole, we must be one with the law of the whole, as well as with the spirit. So we can't separate out our oneness, right? So it's not dissimilar to the minute a quark winks into existence, the minute an atom comes into being, the minute a molecule begins to form, it is immediately subject to the law of gravity. It doesn't turn the law on. It doesn't have to engage with the law. It doesn't have to say, oh, here I am. It doesn't have to say, okay, could you please hold me in place now? I'm going to create myself in place where I need to be. No, the law of gravity is simply immediately present. It is immediately operating. And we have many laws like that. The law of growth, the fact that things that have the ability of some kind of life as we understand it scientifically, generally we would say organic life or animate life. We obviously know that all of creation is alive, all of it is conscious, but some of it can actually grow and move around. And it does so in a lawful manner, according to the law of growth. So these laws, they're just inherent in the fabric of the universe. They're inherent because let me start that sentence again. They're inherent in the fabric of the universe because they are inherent to the reality of the nature of this one wholeness. Do you see? So it's just always present. Therefore, it's present for us as well. We can say it's present in us. We can say it's present for us. We can say it's present and acting all the time. However we want to understand it. We just have to be careful that we don't get confused with spatial references. It actually isn't someplace and not someplace else, right? The law of cause and effect, the great universal law, is simply present. And therefore, it is constantly operating. Again, psychology has determined the fact to be more than fancy. The characteristics of the subconscious mind of a human being determines our subconscious unity with the universal life, law, and action. the characteristic, right, having to do with the more that we are understanding this, the more, conscious we make that which is unconscious or automatic. So in the subjective mind, we find a law obeying our word, the servant of our spirit, the mental law of our being, the creative factor within us. This is our individual use of the great subjective mind of the universe, which is the seat of all law and action. So sometimes I think the challenge with all of this is the words that are being used, right? Again, I want to caution us that we don't overly psychologize this simply because we're using the term subjective mind or universal subjective mind. What we're trying to get at here is that there is an aspect of the whole that is, as the Hindus and the Taoists called it, the receptive womb, the receptive nature of life, which takes the impulse, takes the impress, and manifests it. Now, it's not like there's a being going, oh, I'm going to pick that seed, and I'm going to figure out whether or not it should manifest. I'm going to figure out how it should, in what form or way should it manifest. Is it going to have an easy time becoming itself? Is it going to have a hard time becoming itself? No. The law simply takes that impress, that impulse, and does what it does. So this is why we equate this with the creative process. So when we think of the nature of reality, we're always thinking about how does the intangible absolute become the tangible relative? How does that which is whole, has no parts to it, become something that appears to be separated in lots of little bits and pieces? How does the unity become multiplicity, right? And this is the great question of the ages. And so over the eons of humanity trying to figure this out, right, trying to understand this, of course, we came up with the spirits. The spirits are doing it. Then the spirits became God, and the God is doing it. Right? And what is so wonderful about metaphysics is we don't actually need a being to decide whether or not the particular seed or impulse can manifest. We actually can see that it's a process. It's a process that we can describe. Just like we can describe the law of growth. If you plant a seed in soil that is reasonably fertile, and it gets watered and sun, the seed inherently grows. The impulse is what makes the seed alive, right? If the seed has died, if it's gotten dried up and died, it's not going, the law of growth has nothing to work with. Right? So it's an alive impulse, and the law automatically takes off. Now, if this, the parable of the seeds, if the seed grows, if the seed falls on fertile ground, it grows. If it falls on stony ground, it withers and dies. Nothing for it to grab onto. If it falls on ground that is unfertile, that is depleted, or doesn't get what it needs, and doesn't have enough water, enough sun, or enough minerals, or whatever it is that it needs, the plant may grow, but it will be a sickly plant, and it won't grow into its fullness because it's not able to get everything that it needs. But do you see, the law of growth isn't saying, wait, why am I on stony ground? Why am I on bad soil? It's not doing that. There's no, in this sense, this is why we call it impersonal and automatic because it is simply the process, the way in which impulse becomes, or we might say it's the way being becomes. It's the way the impulse of life becomes created, becomes manifest in the physical universe. So we talk about the law as if it's something separate, or as if it's something like we turn on and off, or something that we use only when we decide to manifest something. No, it's happening all the time. We're using it all the time. This process is operating. So then we have to go to this word, universal subjective mind. Okay. So again, starting from where we started, I think 2 years ago now. I can't remember now when we started back at the beginning of the book. Remember that we're not talking about a human mind. Right? Over and over and over again, we have to remember that thought and mind were the words that the writers of that time period had to try to get a hold of what we're talking about. It's really universal subjective consciousness. It's that aspect of consciousness that receives the impress, which is why it's called the receptive aspect of consciousness. And you've heard it millions of times. The best analogy in terms of how this creative process works is seed, soil, plant. So universal subjective mind is like the soil. So the soil can't say, wait, why are you planting tomatoes? You don't like tomatoes. Why are you planting tomatoes? You know they don't grow here. Why are you planting tomatoes when you always kill the tomato plant? Right? The soil doesn't say any of that, has no opinion about what's being presented to it, what's being planted. The other thing about the soil is that it is, so in universal subjective mind, it would be like virgin soil. It's like the beautiful earth that we find in a natural ecosystem that's constantly being replenished by the leaves, and it's rich and everything grows in it, right? But we have our patch, if you so will. He says our use of universal subjective mind. So it's kind of like our little plot of ground, right? We have our little plot of ground that we are now engaged with. The problem is, many of us are poisoning our little plot of ground. We poison it with Roundup, because we don't want the weeds. We poison it with fertilizer that overstimulates. We poison it with all kinds of things. Our little plot of ground on which we're growing our life, right? And so if we're using that analogy of soil, the soil inherently is great. But we're adding stuff. Well, what is that we're adding to the soil? That's whatever we hold in consciousness that has become unconscious to us, right? Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. So collectively, let's just draw this analogy out till it falls apart, shall we? So collectively, we could equate that with acid rain. Race consciousness is just raining at crap on our little piece of soil, and because that's what humanity is believing or has believed for whatever thousands of years. You can only hang out with people from your own tribe. Anybody who looks different is scary, and oh my God, what do they want? And you got to work really hard. That's the only way to get ahead. And who do you think you are anyway? Right, all the stuff that the belief systems that we get from our biology, from our culture, from our ethnicity or race, from our family, and then from our own personal experiences. Right, all of that is slowly raining down onto our little plot of soil of our use of universal subjective mind. And it's all getting lodged there. course, it's getting lodged in every other plot too, right? All of our plots that are together, side by side, all of that's getting lodged. Now, what we want to do, what we're seeking to, let's stop. Wait, let me just stop. So why does Ernest Holmes use the word subjective mind and not subconscious mind or unconscious mind? And the reason that he becomes very adamant about this is because there is a original idea, and when all of this became revealed through psychology, through Freud and Jung and hypnotism and all of these processes, Quimby, that really illuminated this idea that we have this huge reservoir of patterns of thinking. He didn't like the word unconscious or subconscious because it implies that it's not awake. Like, think about when you say, oh, that person is unconscious, right? They're not aware. There's truth to that, right? We're not aware of what's back here. So those terms are not inappropriate. But because we're metaphysicians, Ernest Holmes actually chose the word subjective mind because the soil in and of itself is whole. But over the eons of human beings evolving into who we are, and over the centuries of our cultures and the decades of our family, acid rain has rained down onto it. And the soil has been subject to the beliefs what people have come to learn to be true, regardless of whether it's true with a capital T, right? That's been like acid rain over the centuries and millennium raining down on the soil. And we all know what happens, right? What happens? I just went to my naturopath and he said, wow, you're doing great with all the work you're doing and all this stuff that's going on. You're doing great, except that I'm testing you for Roundup.
No.
Yes. And I eat almost nothing but organic food, except that I've been so busy that I haven't been making my own food at home. So what happens with that which is in the soil, and you plant a plant in it, sucks it right up, sucks it all up, right? So it sucks up out of subjective mind all of the stuff that's rained down on it from, again, our biology, our being human, the physical reality that you look like you're over there and I look like I'm over here, that there's some materiality to the world that gives us a sense of how it works. And then we have, as I said, culture, race, ethnicity, gender, our families, and our own personal history. And so the soil is subject to all of that. But if that's the case, what can we do? We can plant crops that will pull all that shit out of there, pull all that stuff out of there. We can take those crops away. We can plant new crops that fertilize the soil. We can roll those new crops in, and we can rebuild the health of our soil. Do you see? Universal subjective mind, and our little plot in it is just like that. We can both weed out the weeds. We can do spiritual practices which are basically like planting crops that will pull all that stuff out of the soil, pull it out, throw it away, burn it, plant new crops, turn it under, right? We can do all of that in consciousness because the soil is subject to the impress of conscious mind. We tend to, because we're so psychologized, nothing wrong with it. I've been in years of therapy, feel like I have to go to therapy again. Nothing wrong with it, right? It's working on certain levels of our consciousness, but as metaphysicians, we work at the causal level of consciousness. So rather than focusing on how is what's coming up from our subconscious growing and infiltrating our demonstrations, we focus on how do we clean up the soil and plant something new. It doesn't really matter where the acid rain comes from, does it? I mean, in that sense, yes, of course, that's where the analogy starts breaking down, right? Of course, we have to do something about the acid rain on the human level. But there's this whole opportunity we have at the causal level to engage and rebuild, recreate, impress new onto the soil, not just be the victims of that which is growing in there. Okay, that's probably as far as we can push that analogy, if it hasn't broken down already, right? Because any physical analogy is not going to cover the whole thing. There's just no way, but at least we're trying to get a hold of it. So this idea that this underlying field of consciousness is subject to the impress of our thought. If this were not the case, we would be doomed to simply forever play out everything that has rained on our little plot of ground. We would never be able to change anything. But that's not true. We know that's not true because we change things, we heal things, we create new patterns, we decide to walk through fear, we decide to not let our limitations keep us down. We have lots of evidence of prayers answered, TSRWs, healings, right? So we have lots and lots of evidence that it can in fact be changed. So the whole conversation about the law is really nothing more than us recognizing that we can be doing this consciously instead of continually replanting over and over and over again all the same stuff, just continuing to harvest from our little plot of subjective mind what we've always harvested. Let's stop there and give somebody else a chance to get a word in edgewise. All right, Joseph. Good morning, Joseph. We're going to turn to you and we're going to see what comments we have out there and see who has something they want to share in here.
All right. Good morning, Dr. Peacher. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for bearing through any of the technical difficulties. The morning is started. This is a very interesting conversation, and there's a couple of ways you can join us. If you're here in the room with us, you can simply raise your hand, and myself or Richard will bring you the microphone. If you're joining us on Zoom, just tap the raise your hand icon, and if you're on Facebook, just type your questions in the chat without further delay. Let's get into it.
All right, we got one in the room here.
Good morning, Dr. Petra.
Good morning, Armando.
So I love this planting seeds, and in 2018, I planted a seed that Cardboard Project would go nationwide. And I would start having these weekly calls, and I renamed it National Expansion Call, just to plant that seed and continue to water it. It's taking shape, and I know I continue to water when it's time to water the plant. I may be in a meeting, and it brings up something, and I go back and check it. Some team leads refer to me as Johnny Appleseed.
Yes,
and
yes.
I've never thought that I would be a spiritual gardener. And I see today, I can see that when I close my eyes and I vision, I have acres of plants that are blooming. Some are just, the seeds have just been laid down. I see one of the plants, we're getting close to moving into San Antonio. We just got recognized nationwide, one of 66 nonprofits across the country. It's not national in the way that I had envisioned it.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
Yes.
I'm just allowing things to unfold. We're close to getting ready to, the seed that I planted for Tarrant County, it's already happening. It's blooming. And it's just being patient with myself, patient with allowing it to unfold in the way it's supposed to unfold.
Right.
And allow it. And I get to live in the allness of seeing the beauty that comes out and the impact that it has in our world. And that's what energizes me, is to stay centered and grounded and knowing that I can continue planting seeds. Some of them take a year, some take hours, some take years.
Yes.
And it's
yes.
okay.
Yes.
It is
yes.
okay.
Yes.
When I have that trust and I believe, and because of the continued manifestations, my spiritual practices just become stronger and stronger.
Yes.
And just more in sync. And that subconsciousness of just letting it flow in the way it's supposed to flow.
Beautiful. I love that, Armando. There's so many beautiful things that you said in there, which I really love, right? The first thing is you actually have to plant the seed. Sometimes we get this backwards and we say, oh, whatever Spirit wants. Well, Spirit, all the universe is doing is waiting. Could you decide? Just plant a seed, any seed. But until you plant the seed, what's going to happen is just whatever's already in the soil is going to keep growing. And we know what happens, right? That's how the weeds grow and everything becomes, this big jumbled mess. So you have to plant the seed. But once the seed is planted, it's tended. You're watering it with your spiritual practice, with your expectation, but also with patience. This is why I love not just the law of cause and effect, but the law of growth. And somewhere, I was just recently reading, I can't remember now, where Ernest Holmes, he specifically talks about this, and he says, you don't tell the plant how many leaves to grow. You don't tell the plant when to divide, which stalk should have the bloom. That is the job of the law of growth. And sometimes there's something in the way. There's a wall or there's another plant. And you don't go, oh, this plant isn't working because it's only growing out here on one side. But it's being its fullness as a plant, right? As whatever plant it was growing into. And you talked about, so we use the word allowing, which is really just another word for trust. It means get out of the way, follow the trail. If it looks like the plant needs a trellis, put a trellis up. Don't make the plant wrong. Also allowing also means, if we're going to push this metaphor even further, if you plant a whole boatload of seeds, you may not be able to water or take care of all of them. Sometimes there's pruning. Sometimes you pull out some seeds in between. This is particularly true with carrots and beets. If you're planting carrots and beets, you get a lot of carrots. But if you don't pull some of them out, the other ones can't grow. So you trust that you're fertilizing the right ones, that the ones that are beginning to grow bigger, you leave them alone and you take out the ones that are in the way. All of that is then being committed to the process. And I loved what you said, patience. We think that I've done one treatment. Why would I do another treatment? Well, because you're fertilizing the seed, you're juicing it, you're giving it attention. And the law of growth is in physical manifestation, right? And so when we're creating things that are new, especially when we're really in the creative process, the time and process is in the manifestation portion, right? The planting of the seed in our treatments over and over and over, we're doing that as this has happened. This is happening. This is absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, where we're going and what we're doing. Gosh, I wonder how that's going to work. Ooh, that's part of the fun, the serendipity, all the coincidence, all the surprising things that happen that, like, wow, I didn't know it was going to look like that. Which doesn't mean we didn't plant a seed. We did. Sometimes our seed has a very clear form. Sometimes our seed is more, nationwide. We're nationwide. Okay, that's a pretty clear seed, but it doesn't say what the form is. It doesn't say what it looks like. It doesn't say how it's going to happen, because then there's this place of trust. So trust and patience are a big part of understanding how we our use of universal subjective mind and how these principles actually operate in our lives. That was a great sharing and testimonial for how this works, Armando. And right, and of course, sometimes we just have to really double down on our spiritual practice, because we're doubling down on our belief that despite the fact that we don't see it yet, it's already planted in mind. It has been subjectified into consciousness, and it must now manifest somehow, some way, in whatever time frame it's going to take. Beautiful. All right. Anything, Joseph? Should we turn to you online? Anybody who has anything else they want to share out there, and then we'll come back into the room.
Yes, looks like we have a question from our Zoom audience. Marjorie, could you unmute your mic and join the conversation?
Good morning, Marjorie.
Hi, good morning. I just love this topic. It's I love all this stuff.
Me too.
So I have put something into the Zoom question. I'm going to see if I can pull it up. So I want to read it. It's just easier to read it.
Sure.
So I put in there, I am curious about Holmes' understanding of the law of growth as compared to Aristotle's notion of the word entelechy. Aristotle's concept of entelechy, when all potential is fully actualized, is the purpose of each human. The actualization of potential implies its existence in abstraction before it is actualized. Therefore, there are already many potential versions of each one of us that exist. Therefore, the law of growth also includes the entelechy or the inevitability of the death of physical form. Everything that is manifest in form eventually returns. So I know that Ernest Holmes doesn't, at least from my understanding, doesn't sort of include in his understanding of law of growth that everything that is manifest in physical form eventually returns to the invisible.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Oh, it's completely included in the science of mind, because why? The physical universe is forever changing. He says spirit is forever taking form and then releasing the form that is taken so it can take new form. Over and over and over, he reminds us of this. He doesn't call it death because that's, I think, too frightening for most people. But yes, absolutely, the science of mind completely understands. There is nothing in the science of mind that would encourage us to think that we would be physically immortal. You are spiritually immortal, but the body is not designed because the nature of physicality is for it to change. And that's why we talk about it's a transformative philosophy. And so when you transform, that which you were before must die. So I would say it's completely embedded in the understanding of the law of growth, right? That's where we get the seasons and cycles.
Yes, can I just add something?
Yes, of course.
In Holmes' original text of the Science of Mind from 1926, I think he does talk more about death, and that for whatever reason, in the 1938 version of it, he took out some things. But I just think, in general, because most indigenous peoples do not have this fear of death and do not think that death is scary or anything like that. So it's included in most indigenous cultures. That
Absolutely.
The cycle of life includes the death and then the rebirth, kind of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it's not just Ernest Holmes, right? That's the American culture. That, and you have to remember, New Thought was born right out of the American culture. So we have context that we're always having to deal with, and because also New Thought specifically started around physical healing. So people were dying in droves of things that then New Thought was like, wait, but these can be healed. And so I think that's the other reason, right? So we always have to contextualize, what the project is. Ernest Holmes had a particular project. He wasn't trying to answer every question or, include everything. But I would, yes, and I love your question about entelechy, of course, right? That's the idea that which is needed is already in the seed, and and the law of growth unfolds that in whatever way. All those possibilities, all of that potentiality is already there, and it is, of course, already within us. And so I would say that is deeply embedded. Or maybe, I think what Ernest Holmes has tried to do is take out the philosophical words so that he was constantly trying to make it more and more and more accessible to people. And I think that Science of Mind is a beautiful marriage of Plato and Aristotle, right? These things don't have to be split as they have become split in the Western philosophical tradition. So unfortunate, so unnecessary, right? Because it's always a both and. So yes, I think your point is extremely well taken, right? The law of growth includes this constant growing, and for me it's always the ecosystem that shows us this. For an ecosystem to grow, things are constantly dying and being reborn. And this is why so many of our new thought inspiration come from people who found their inspiration in nature, because you can't help but walk around in nature and see the cycle of life. Right, you see it in its beauty and its continuation. For me, it was in when I was studying environmental science back at the University of Washington, and we went on a trip out to the rainforest out on the Olympic Peninsula and the beautiful beaches out there. And I remember our instructor walking us through the rainforest, and she would say, "See that? That's a nurse log." What does that mean? A nurse log. And we were all fascinated by these nurse logs. And what they are trees that have come to the end of their life or have been somehow blown down, they've died, they've fallen over. And it's one of the reasons why when you go into an old growth forest, it looks like trees have been planted unnaturally. No, they were all grown on a nurse log. So the nurse log falls over and has lots of little crevices in its bark. Pretty soon the moss comes in and the mushrooms and all the underlying microorganisms that are causing it to decay, which means they're creating some food. And so the seeds fall on it of the trees nearby, and then the seeds grow, and they grow in a row along the nurse log. And that's why it's called a nurse log, because when they fall on the ground, there's too much shade or there's already too many plants growing there. So the nurse log is above all the stuff that's growing on the ground, and these seeds actually have a chance. And so they're nursed by this log, by the death of this tree, nursed into new life. And I can still tell you the lecture she gave me. She gave us, standing there in the woods, being absolutely enthralled with this idea. And so the law of growth, right? And again, it's I think sometimes we're also overly focused on death. Partly because we have come to fear it in the first world countries. It's become a medical event. We become overly focused on death, and we think that this is, and what we see is the ongoingness of life. So even death is a bit of a misnomer, and I think that's the other reason why Ernest Holmes and Science of Mind doesn't focus on the word death, because there isn't death there. There is the continual unfolding of an immortal life, and it is forever changing form. That's what we want to focus on, not death. It's changing form. Every form will change. Your children will change. Your body will change. The job you have today will change. This life that you're currently experiencing as a human being, it will change. Everything, anything that is in form will change. And underlying that is an ongoing, forever, immortal expression of life. And that includes your individuated life, period, end of sentence. And so rather than focusing on the loss, yes, psychologically we need to do that. Humanly we need to do that, but not at the causal level. At the spiritual causal level, we focus on that change is inevitable, and it is so new form can grow. So this is the whole point. Don't be attached. Don't be attached to the form you're currently in. Don't be attached to what your body looks like. Don't be attached to your age. Don't be attached to your job. Don't be attached to these things, because inevitably, somewhere along the line, it will change, and it will stop being what it is so that a new form can take place. And I think, Marjorie, that's one of the reasons why maybe it's not satisfactory to you that isn't in the science of mind, but that's the focus of the science of mind. Not to pretend that there isn't death, but to help us understand that it is such a natural thing, and that we have to make friends with change and transformation. And I find it very interesting how often we use our spirituality to actually try to hold things in place, to really grip on with our attachments, rather than recognizing this continual flow of life moving forward. That doesn't mean, I've had this job for longer than I ever imagined I would ever have any job. And we've gone through one change after another, and now here we are going through a whole nother change. I have my red shoes on, for those of you who are coming to the celebration here shortly. I have my red sneakers on because it's our last move day. And here we are transforming again, changing the shape, the form of CSLDallas so that new forms can grow. A new ability to reach out online, greater financial support so we can do more work at DFW, opportunities to hire more staff, right? A different form of CSLDallas, which in no way implies that we've stopped growing or that the life has stopped. Do you see? And we want to cling to, but this is the way I know it. I want it to be the way I know it. No, just look at your life. That's just not how that works. And so this is why we focus on transformation. And so we'll close with this thought, right? Transformation, of course, the idea of it is always the butterfly that was once a caterpillar. And the caterpillar goes and builds that little chrysalis, and it does not die in there. I think this is the other reason we don't focus on the word death. It does not die in there. It wraps itself in a little chrysalis, and what does it do? I'll never forget when I learned this. Oh my God. It dissolves. It dissolves its form. It goes back into really goo, and the very last thing that happens, it just cracks me up, is the head pops off. So the very last thing that happens is usually we have to give up our intellectual idea about how it's supposed to be, right? It was always cracked me up. The head pops off. And inside there are imaginal cells. They call them imaginal cells. Those imaginal cells, when that when that caterpillar is completely dissolved into goo, the imaginal cells are activated through the law of growth, which grew the caterpillar and is now continuing to grow that being, but is now completely transforming it into something entirely different than it was before. And when it crawls out of that chrysalis, it's a butterfly. Now, you can say that caterpillar died. Yes, it died to its caterpillar form. But the life did not. That's what science of mind focuses on. No matter any change, whether it's death or any other change or transformation, it is the continuity of the individuated life that we focus on. And therefore, we can embrace change. We can flow with change. We can allow change. We can trust the process. And we can welcome the flow, right? As Armando started out with so beautifully, So great. Well, look forward to seeing you soon. Bye for now.